Hi guys, welcome back or welcome to Switch to Life. And in today's video, we are going to be reviewing Aardman's 10th movie that they've made, which is, of course, Wallace and Gromit: Vengeance Most Foul, which is technically the 6th movie of the Wallace and Gromit franchise, but at the same time, the second movie because it's the second one that's over an hour long. Now, actually really enjoyed this movie. In fact, I would argue that it's probably the best piece of Wallace and Gromit media out there. I just loved everything about this movie because it was simply amazing. Not only do you have some really emotional tension with Wallace and Gromit's relationship, but you also have a really fun story, not to mention the return of a super major villain, and also a lot of Easter eggs to previous Wallace and Gromit installments, including a reference to Shaun the Sheep. Honestly, my one complaint about this movie might be the fact that we don't see Fluffles or Lady Tottington, the love interests of Wallace and Gromit, but after thinking about it, I realized that including them wouldn't have really fit with the story, and they probably would have done absolutely nothing to add to it. So, while it would have been nice fan service, they weren't necessary. Honestly, this is just one of those movies that makes me sad it's a Netflix original because it would have done so well in theaters because it's so stinking good. I love it. It's probably helped by the super awesome animation, probably the best animation out of the entire Aardman library, which kind of makes sense considering that stop motion animation has come a long way. Oh, and speaking of, this will probably be Aardman's last project for a really long time because it turns out that Aardman uses a specific clay that's made in a specific factory that was shut down. Thankfully, they purchased enough clay to make this movie, but as soon as it was released, they had no more clay. And while Nick Park has said that they're going to find a brand new clay supplier, but with that in mind, they probably still need to learn how to work with the new clay, and they also still need to find said supplier. But honestly, considering that this was the last movie that was made using this specific clay, I was actually a really big fan of it. Mostly because the animation was amazing, especially compared to the old Wallace and Gromit shorts. Yes, I'm even including the wrong trousers in there because a lot has changed from the time they made that to the time they made this. As for the voice acting, well, I do have one complaint. Peter Sallis unfortunately retired from the role of playing Wallace and also died, so there's that. Rest in peace. But instead, we got Ben Whitehead to play Wallace, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, when I was watching the trailer, I was actually kind of thrown off because, it was a new voice actor. But then as I'm watching the movie, I'm like, this is the Wallace that we fell in love with. It still sounds a little bit like Peter Sallis, but close enough to the point where it's still the same character. I really enjoyed that. Also, we ended up getting the return of PC Macintosh from The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, or maybe I should say Chief Inspector Macintosh, as he got promoted from police constable. As for the other actors, they all did a great job with their characters, especially because most of their line deliveries were funny and quirky, though not very emotional with the exception of Police Constable Mukherjee, because she did an amazing job expressing emotion. Sadly, all of the other characters were kind of just one note and felt like they were just there, which, with the exception of Norbot, who is a robot, so it makes sense why his line delivery wouldn't have emotion, but all of the other characters with voice actors, they were kind of just there, and they were meant to add to a couple of scenes, but they weren't meant to be like main characters, We weren't supposed to relate to them, we were just supposed to find some of their lines funny or something. And for the most part, that actually did come across. So voice acting was pretty great. As for the music, it's Wallace and Gromit. They have a lot of iconic music here, not to mention the fact that the music seems to add a lot to the drama of what's going on in the scene. I especially loved how dark the tone of the music got as the story progressed. Speaking of, the story is simply amazing and probably the best thing that has happened to the Wallace and Gromit franchise, and that's really saying something. So with that in mind, I 100% recommend that you go watch this movie. Oh, and if I can't convince you, how about Rotten Tomatoes? The film has a 100% from critics and a 96% from audience. So obviously this movie is good if it has 100% from critics. However, you do also need to know that you need to watch Wallace and Gromit: The Wrong Trousers before you do. Otherwise, the story isn't really going to make sense. But any of the other Wallace and Gromit media, you don't have to watch. You can just watch The Wrong Trousers and then this, and you'll be fine. And honestly, I highly recommend that you watch this. So with that in mind, we're going to dive into the spoilers. So the story starts off with Wallace making a bunch of brand new inventions that are used to get rid of mundane, simple tasks that just take up valuable time and no one wants to do, like getting dressed or bathing or, making breakfast. Sometimes these machines malfunction, but who cares about that? Honestly, the problem is that he's building a bunch of machines to get rid of meaningless tasks, and for the most part, most of these machines actually make sense, but then there's one in particular which I feel really sad about, because Gromit was looking a little upset.
You look like you need a good pat. Come here. My new Pat-O-Matic will oblige.
Which is really upsetting because that's like saying that Gromit is boring and a meaningless task, which is really sad. We also have to talk about how he invented Norbot, which is a gnome that can do pretty much any task possible.
He's voice activated.
And the reason he did it was because he noticed that Gromit was spending a lot of time in the garden. And I kind of like that Gromit has a side hobby of taking care of the garden. But with Wallace, all he cares about is just making the gnome make the place neat and tidy. He doesn't care about adding color or vibrancy like Gromit. And the thing is, I'm pretty sure that this is kind of a hobby for Gromit, something he enjoys doing. Having a robot do the job for him and not even correctly is kind of a little upsetting. And then there's also the fact that all of the neighbors see the Norbot and decided that they want to try to get Norbot to take care of their gardens too, at which point Wallace gets a business idea. You see, just like in The Wrong Trousers, they're suffering from a bunch of bills because inventing is not really a cheap hobby. And with that in mind, Wallace decides to have Norbot be rented out by a bunch of people, and Norbot will take care of their gardens and they will pay him. So, business idea. At the same time, though, Norbot is taking care of all of the tasks, which is something that Gromit used to do. And I kind of find it a little bit sad because Gromit was kind of abused whenever they were doing a job together, but now he's just being sidelined and not doing any job whatsoever. Wallace is just ignoring Gromit, and it's just making me really sad. And it definitely makes Gromit jealous of Norbot. So when Norbot goes into Gromit's room to recharge, and in the process makes a bunch of snoring noises, which I do not understand why you would program a robot to snore, he decides to take Norbot to the basement and plug him into a computer to recharge. Now, let's go back a little bit. A few years ago, Feathers McGraw was this penguin that wanted to steal a blue diamond, but he was thwarted by Wallace and Gromit in The Wrong Trousers, at which point he was sent to prison. So, in this movie, we see Feathers McGraw make a plan to escape from prison and frame Wallace and Gromit for stealing the diamond. First, he sees the advertisement for Norbot on the television, at which point he decides to break into Wallace and Gromit's Wi-Fi connection and somehow makes it so he can reprogram Norbot to make him evil instead of good. So now Norbot is evil because he was plugged into the computer to receive these commands. The first of which is to create an army of Norbots, at which point the army would go around doing the gardening job that Wallace wanted them to do, but at the same time, they would take a bunch of materials from people's houses and then use them to create a submarine so that they could then go into the zoo where Feathers McGraw is being held captive, and then they use the submarine to help Feathers McGraw escape. And the problem is that with everybody's tools and supplies going missing, and everybody knows that it was the Norbots who did it, and Wallace invented the Norbots, people frame Wallace for the crime. At which point the police go over and they investigate, trying to find some evidence to hook Wallace up with the crime.
I'm guilty of theft by gnome.
Ha! There you go! He admits it!
And they end up taking a lot of his inventions. And the problem with that is that Wallace is very reliant on his inventions. He has no idea how to do anything for himself. He can't remember how to get dressed. He doesn't know how to make food. He can't even bathe himself properly without being launched out of his house. And the only way that he can prove his innocence is by finding a Norbot and proving that it's malfunctioning. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the machine he needs to track the Norbots, so while Gromit breaks into the police station to find the Norbot tracker, he overhears their conversation about how the police constable has been scanning over all of Wallace's inventions, and not a single one of them proves that he's evil. In fact, all Wallace ever did was try to make inventions to help people, never imagining that they could ever be used for evil. So while Police Constable Mukherjee is trying to find evidence, she ends up realizing that it's possible Wallace is an innocent man. Unfortunately, the chief inspector still believes that Wallace is a criminal, and I think that the main reason is because he wants to go out on a high note. He wants to be the one to stop a crime wave before he retires, because he's been a police officer for 40 years. And honestly, he kind of deserves retirement because he did an amazing job as a police officer, especially when, after Wallace and Gromit called it in, he apprehended Feathers McGraw and returned the blue diamond to a secure location. However, now that he's about to retire, he wants to put the blue diamond back out on display in a museum. And he can't wait for his big moment, except when he finally opens the safe and pulls out the bag, he empties it to show off a turnip. Apparently, long before he ended up putting it in the safe, somebody swapped out the diamond with a turnip. And apparently the person who gave him the bag was none other than Wallace. So clearly, at least in the chief inspector's eyes, Wallace was the one who stole the blue diamond, and now he's using his Norbots to commit a crime wave. And while I think that would be a good plan, problem is that's actually not the case. Wallace is an innocent man, kind of struggling without any inventions. And meanwhile, Gromit is trying to track down the missing Norbots, and he actually sees them break Feathers McGraw outside of the prison zoo, during which Norbot is sent to go after Gromit, at which point he ends up hitting the reset button accidentally, turning him from evil to good. At this point, Gromit and Norbot follow Feathers as he returns to Wallace and Gromit's house, at which point he ends up capturing Wallace and Gromit, and then reveals that he stashed the diamond away in a teapot, and it's been hidden there all this time in their own home. And what's really funny is that throughout the movie, they say, we haven't had to use a teapot since I invented that kettle machine, eh, Gromit? But when they take their inventions, Wallace tries to get the teapot to work again, only to say it's broken just because I don't know how it works. It's actually kind of funny. What would have made it even funnier is if it was the same teapot that was in both Grand Day Out and The Wrong Trousers. Unfortunately, I went back to watch both of them, and the teapot in Vengeance Most Fowl is brown, while the teapot in both A Grand Day Out and The Wrong Trousers is black, and the teapot in A Close Shave is green. But anyway, Feathers McGraw ends up saying goodbye to Wallace and Gromit and leaves them tied up so that he can frame them for the crime of stealing the blue diamond. And so Wallace and Gromit are about to go to prison until Norbot manages to show up. Except he doesn't actually help them, he just grabs a vacuum and starts vacuuming. And so Gromit ends up using a leaf blower to escape from the closet, at which point a chase begins. Not only are Wallace and Gromit chasing Feathers McGraw, as well as his army of Norbots, but also the police are chasing Wallace because they think he is the one who has the blue diamond, not Feathers, because they have no idea Feathers escaped from prison. In fact, they kind of just assume that Wallace is chasing a nun. So Wallace makes an invention that throws a bunch of boots, and the boots kind of come back like boomerangs and hits the evil Norbots in the back, making their reset buttons go off so that they turn from evil to good. At which point Feathers loses his army of Norbots, and then Gromit manages to get onto Feathers' boat, but unfortunately Feathers makes the boat crash on a bridge, and as it hangs precariously off the edge, Gromit is holding the blue diamond and Feathers is trying to get it back. But if Feathers takes one step closer, Gromit and Feathers both fall. And I really love what happens next, because at this point, Wallace apologizes for all the times he neglected Gromit. He can live without inventing, but he cannot live without his best friend. So he says, just give the diamond to Feathers. And so Gromit throws the bag containing the diamond to Feathers, at which point Feathers jumps off of the boat and then it falls off the cliff with Gromit. So Gromit is about to fall to his death, but luckily the Norbots end up linking their arms together and they form a robo-gnome chain to rescue Gromit before he plummets. And so the Norbots help Gromit up and Wallace and Gromit are reunited as best friends. And then the police show up, at which point they try to arrest Wallace, but then they see that Feathers McGraw is the one who got away with the blue diamond. But when Feathers opens the bag, inside is a turnip. Yeah, turns out that Gromit ended up switching the bag containing the blue diamond with the turnip. And so Feathers McGraw may have been able to escape from prison, but unfortunately, he did not get the blue diamond. So the blue diamond was returned to the authorities, and this time it was the actual diamond, thank goodness for that. But also the authorities say that Wallace is an innocent man and decide to let him go. At which point the Chief Inspector McIntosh decides to apologize to his police constable, who kept saying that she trusted her instincts, that Wallace was innocent, and then he says the only thing that matters is to trust your gut. And you did just that. Your gut was not wrong, mine was. And so the Chief Inspector retires on a high note, and he makes PC Mukherjee as the new Chief Inspector. And so Wallace, Gromit, and the Norbots return home, and they begin a new life for themselves. Sure, Wallace may still build a few inventions here and there, but at this point he realizes that there are just some things that machines can't do. They need a human touch, like petting and taking care of his best friend. Also, while it's not really confirmed, I'm pretty sure that Wallace will try to do a better job of taking care of himself without machines. He'll learn how to take care of himself, which I think would be really good. But again, that's not really shown off, so that might just be my own theory. And that's it for my review. Overall, I thought that Vengeance Most Foul was probably the best out of the entire Wallace and Gromit franchise, and I cannot wait to see what the creators of Aardman do for the next film. Which, by the way, Nick Park did specify that Wallace and Gromit's story does not end here. As far as he's concerned, there's still some bounce in their bungee. But again, don't expect the next Wallace and Gromit for a really long time because they take forever to make, because it's stop motion. As to what the next movie could possibly be about, well, I would like to see the return of Feathers McGraw once again. Unlike a lot of the other villains who have kind of been reformed or killed off, Feathers actually managed to escape from prison in this movie. So he's still out there, and even though he didn't succeed in his plan to get the blue diamond, something tells me that he'll still try to get revenge on Wallace and Gromit for foiling him twice now. But what do you guys think? Would you look forward to another Wallace and Gromit installment, or do you think it's about time the series ended? And with that, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, consider supporting the channel by joining my membership program and clicking the join button down below, or you can just do the free option and subscribe. But please, can we get this channel to 1,000 subscribers? I would really love that, and I especially want to get this channel channel to 800 by the time Dogman hits theaters. So with that in mind, I hope that you're all staying safe out there, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye-bye.
A copper's guts.
Copper's guts, sir?
Instinct. I've got quite a copper's gut myself, actually.
Oh, I can see that, Chief.